Stop for a second and imagine this. 6 hours ago, the rules that govern every satellite above your head were quietly overruled. Not bent, not stretched, overruled. At exactly 8:42 UTC on February 24, 2026, monitoring stations connected to NASA's Deep Space Network and the United States Space Force tracking facilities confirmed something they could not explain away. This was not a software malfunction. It was not solar interference. It was not a data glitch. It was a physical event measured independently across continents with a probability so low it effectively equals zero. In that single moment, more than 9,000 active satellites orbiting Earth shifted position simultaneously, not randomly, not chaotically. Every one of them moved exactly 3 meters away from Earth. Not 2.9, not 3.1, 3 meters. Perfectly uniform, perfectly timed. Think carefully about what that means. These satellites orbit at different heights, different speeds, different inclinations. Some are part of vast communication networks like Starlink. Others belong to GPS systems, European positioning arrays, Earth observation missions, or classified reconnaissance platforms. They travel at nearly 17,000 miles per hour. Under normal conditions, orbital changes happen gradually through atmospheric drag or minor propulsion adjustments. But this shift was instantaneous. Gravity does not behave this way. According to Newton's law of universal gravitation, gravitational force follows an inverse square relationship. If a natural gravitational wave were strong enough to lift satellites in low Earth orbit by 3 meters, it would have devastated geostationary satellites, altered tides, and slightly shifted the Moon's orbit. None of that happened. The Moon remained steady. Ocean tides showed no anomaly. The atmosphere was undisturbed. Only artificial objects moved. When analysts reviewed data from the European Space Agency's Gaia Observatory, the numbers were verified repeatedly. The statistical probability of over 9,000 independent objects shifting the exact same distance at the exact same second by coincidence is on the order of 1 in 10 to the power of 80. That is effectively impossible. The conclusion is unavoidable. This was a controlled interaction. Something exerted force selectively on our orbital infrastructure, moved it precisely 3 meters, and then released it. The vector of that force was calculated within minutes. It pointed to a single coordinate in the sky. Right ascension 18 hours. Declination plus 36 degrees. The exact current location of an object we have been monitoring for months. 3I Atlas. Originally classified as a long-period comet on a hyperbolic trajectory, it entered our solar system from interstellar space, larger than previous visitors and accelerating without visible outgassing. Until this morning, it was considered unusual but inactive. That assessment is no longer defensible. But the displacement itself was only the beginning. 3 minutes later, at 8:45 UTC, a second anomaly emerged. Telemetry from thousands of satellites revealed that their reaction wheels, devices used to maintain orientation, spun down to zero. For 90 seconds, over 4,000 satellites stopped rotating and remained locked relative to the stars, stabilized, held. The energy required to dampen the angular momentum of thousands of spinning spacecraft simultaneously would measure in terajoules. Applied carelessly, that energy would have destroyed them. Instead, they were adjusted gently as if guided with intention. Nature does not operate with surgical precision. Natural events are chaotic and uneven. Yet this force acted locally, selectively, and flawlessly. The data from NASA's tracking station in Goldstone, from the European antenna in Australia, and from Japanese monitoring facilities all agree. The displacement propagated at light speed. and yet ground-based gravitational wave detectors remained silent. No space-time ripple consistent with such force was recorded. We are facing a paradox, a gravitational effect without detectable curvature. Which brings us to the most unsettling interpretation. The movement resembled calibration. When engineers calibrate instruments, they make minimal adjustments to bring systems into alignment. At 8:42 UTC, our orbital shell was adjusted, stabilized, aligned. The question is not whether this was intelligent. The evidence points strongly in that direction. The question is what the calibration was for, because immediately after stabilization, something else began. Immediately after the satellites were locked into their new positions, something changed in a way that forces us to rethink everything. At 8:50 UTC, their antennas previously oriented toward Earth for communication shifted alignment. They were no longer pointed down. They were directed outward along the exact vector of the earlier force, straight toward 3I Atlas. This was not commanded from ground control. No software patch was issued. No manual override was transmitted. The alignment occurred in synchronization with the stabilization event, as if part of the same sequence. Then the signal began. It was not a radio transmission. It was not X-ray radiation or gamma bursts. What the instruments detected was far stranger, a controlled oscillation in the magnetic field surrounding each affected satellite. NASA's magnetospheric multiscale mission, a formation of spacecraft designed to study Earth's magnetic environment, recorded localized magnetic fluctuations that should not exist in open orbital space. The oscillations were precise, measured, repeating at exact integer multiples of 7.83 Hz, the fundamental Schumann resonance of Earth, but this signal pulsed at 78.3 Hz, 10 times the planet's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. Consider what it would take to induce such oscillation from nearly 240 million kilometers away. A conventional transmitter would require planetary-scale energy. You would need to modulate the solar wind itself or manipulate charged particles with perfect timing. And yet 3I, Atlas, by all prior classification, is a comet a few kilometers wide, no visible power source, no detectable emission array, no traditional propulsion signature. To understand how this might be possible, theoretical physics offers a concept rarely discussed outside advanced research circles: localized gravitational manipulation. Einstein described gravity as the curvature of spacetime caused by mass. But some higher dimensional models, including certain interpretations of string theory, suggest spacetime curvature could be influenced without conventional mass through interaction with additional dimensions. In simple terms, gravity might be projected, not generated by bulk mass, but engineered. If such a mechanism exists, an advanced civilization could create what physicists sometimes call phantom gravity. Imagine pressing down on a stretched fabric without placing a visible object on it. The surface bends, but there is no ball. If 3I, Atlas, possesses that capability, it could create localized distortions around satellites without affecting Earth, the Moon, or the oceans. That would explain the precision. It would explain why gravitational wave detectors, such as LIGO, remained silent. The curvature was not propagating through space in a detectable wave. It was being applied selectively. The 78.3 Hz oscillation was not random interference. It matches resonant properties within ionospheric plasma at low Earth orbit altitude. It aligns with shielding frequencies in certain satellite subsystems. This was not noise. It resembled a handshake, an interrogation of our technology. Then, at 9:15 UTC, another development forced analysts to reconsider the scope of the event. The Solar Dynamics Observatory recorded a major solar flare eruption on the far side of the Sunday. Under normal astrophysical models, solar flares are chaotic magnetic reconnection events. Their timing is unpredictable. Yet this flare erupted precisely as the magnetic oscillation peaked and along the vector directly connecting Earth and 3I, Atlas. The statistical likelihood of that alignment occurring by chance is vanishingly small. Telemetry from the solar surface shows magnetic field lines snapping and reconnecting in synchronization with the 78.3 Hz pulse. It appears as though the object did not merely interact with Earth's orbit. It interacted with the Sun's magnetic field lines. It used our star as an amplifier. Even more unsettling, the flare is not traveling at typical solar wind speed. It has slowed. The same anomaly that displaced our satellites appears to be influencing the plasma flow, decelerating it. This creates two possible interpretations. Either 3I, Atlas initiated a hostile act against our infrastructure, or it repositioned our satellites to shield them from a flare that would otherwise have destroyed global communications, because when engineers examined the new satellite alignment, they discovered something extraordinary. The satellites had been turned edge-on relative to the incoming plasma stream. Their cross-section to the flare was minimized. GPS arrays, communications, constellations, reconnaissance platforms repositioned just in time. If this was an attack, it was poorly executed. If it was a defense, it was perfectly timed. Which leaves one question: whose side is this intelligence on? Because at exactly 10 UTC, the narrative shifted from physics to biology, and what happened next suggests the satellites may not have been the primary target at all. At 10 UTC, while analysts were still debating whether the satellite shift was an act of aggression or protection, a completely different alert was triggered. This one did not originate from NASA's tracking systems or military monitoring stations. It came from the International Space Station. The crew aboard the ISS reported an anomaly in their biomedical telemetry at the exact moment the satellites had been displaced. For 90 seconds, the same duration, the satellites were held motionless. The heart rates of all 7 astronauts synchronized perfectly, not approximately, exactly, 60 beats per minute. 7 individuals from 4 nations with different physiologies, different stress levels, different breathing patterns, and yet their electrocardiogram traces overlapped so precisely that the data initially appeared duplicated. Human hearts do not behave like synchronized clocks. Heart rate fluctuates continuously with respiration, subtle motion, emotional state, and neural activity. Even elite athletes in controlled environments do not maintain identical rhythms without deliberate pacing. Yet here, in microgravity, during routine station operations, 7 independent cardiovascular systems locked into one unified tempo for precisely 90 seconds. The anomaly did not stop at cardiac rhythm. EEG monitors on 2 sleeping crew members recorded an unexpected surge in gamma wave activity, the frequency range typically associated with intense cognitive processing, problem solving, or moments of insight. Gamma waves do not dominate during sleep. During deep rest, the brain produces slower delta and theta rhythms. Yet these astronauts, asleep at the time, displayed neural patterns consistent with heightened awareness. When questioned later, they reported similar sensations: a momentary heaviness, a subtle pressure, and an unusually vivid clarity of thought. Now connect the sequence. At 8:42 UTC, satellites moved 3 meters. At 8:45, they were stabilized. At 8:50, magnetic oscillations began at 78.3 Hz. At 9:15, a solar flare erupted in synchrony. At 10, human biology in orbit synchronized. The pattern suggests that whatever force originated from 3I, Atlas, was not limited to mechanical systems. It interacted with electromagnetic conditions affecting living organisms. We know the human nervous system is sensitive to electromagnetic fields. Variations in magnetic intensity can influence circadian rhythms, hormonal balance, and neural firing patterns. Controlled laboratory studies have shown measurable biological responses to specific frequency exposures. But synchronizing 7 independent hearts from millions of kilometers away would require precise modulation of the electromagnetic environment surrounding them. That implies not only technical capability, but detailed knowledge of human physiology. This leads to a disturbing possibility. The satellites may not have been the primary objective. They may have been instruments. Consider what happened to them. Over 9,000 metallic structures in orbit were aligned and stabilized simultaneously. Their orientation shifted toward the source. Their rotation ceased. From a physics standpoint, that configuration resembles a phased array, an enormous network of coordinated dipole elements capable of amplifying weak signals. In telecommunications, phased arrays focus and strengthen incoming transmissions by synchronizing multiple receivers. If 3I, Atlas, needed to project a subtle signal toward Earth but lacked sufficient power to penetrate the atmosphere directly, it could use our own infrastructure as an amplifier. The ISS crew felt the effect first because they were outside the protective density of the atmosphere, but at 10:15 UTC, ground-based observatories detected something else. Facilities, including the Very Large Array in New Mexico and the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope in China, recorded a secondary pulse. This one was not electromagnetic. It was gravitational, a microscopic ripple in spacetime, faint yet coherent, moving through the aligned satellite network and passing into Earth's atmosphere. The pulse did not strike cities or strategic facilities. Its calculated focal point lay over the Pacific Ocean. More precisely, it intersected regions above the Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, and the Philippine Trench, some of the deepest and least explored environments on the planet. We have always assumed that if an extraterrestrial intelligence made contact, it would target our governments, our scientists, or our communication systems. Yet this event ignored political structures entirely. It bypassed radio frequencies. It used our satellites not as endpoints, but as a lens directing energy toward the deep ocean. And at 10:30 UTC, hydrophone arrays deployed across the Pacific began recording a response. The acoustic signatures were not consistent with marine mammals or tectonic shifts. They were rhythmic, mechanical, repeating at the same 78.3 Hz pattern first detected around the satellites. If the signal originated from 3I, Atlas, passed through our orbital shell and entered the deep biosphere, then we must confront a radical idea. The interaction may not be about us at all. It may be about something far older, something beneath the surface. And the next development would make that possibility impossible to ignore. By 10:30 UTC, the hydrophone networks positioned across the Pacific were no longer registering ambiguous background noise. The signals were structured, repetitive, deliberate. Analysts at oceanographic monitoring centers initially assumed equipment malfunction, but independent arrays separated by thousands of kilometers recorded identical acoustic patterns. The source triangulated deep within the Mariana Trench, with secondary resonance echoes detected near the Tonga and Philippine trenches. These are not shallow waters influenced by storms or shipping traffic. These are abyssal zones, nearly 11 kilometers beneath the surface, where sunlight never penetrates and pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres. The acoustic signature matched the earlier 78.3 Hz oscillation observed around the satellites. It was not random seismic rumbling. Tectonic shifts generate broadband noise with chaotic frequency spread. Whale vocalizations vary in pitch and modulation. This signal was narrow-band, mechanically consistent, and rhythmically stable. In other words, it carried structure. To understand why this matters, consider the sequence once more. An interstellar object, 3I, Atlas, enters the solar system exhibiting non-standard acceleration without visible outgassing. At 8:42 UTC, satellites shift precisely 3 meters. At 8:50, magnetic oscillations begin. At 9:15, the Sun erupts in synchrony. At 10, human physiology in orbit synchronizes. At 10:15, a gravitational ripple passes through Earth's atmosphere. At 10:30, the deep ocean responds. This progression does not resemble random coincidence. It resembles a chain reaction. Oceanographers have long suspected that the deep biosphere contains ecosystems we barely understand. Microbial life thrives near hydrothermal vents. Extremophiles survive under crushing pressure and extreme temperatures. But what the hydrophones detected did not match known biological patterns. It was mechanical in cadence, like a thrumming engine cycling at constant frequency. One critical detail stands out. The gravitational ripple that passed through the satellite array was focused, not diffuse. If the satellites were acting as a phased gravitational lens, they could amplify and steer microscopic distortions in spacetime. That ripple intersected the ocean surface precisely above trench coordinates. If the alignment was intentional, then the orbital shift at 8:42 was not arbitrary calibration. It was targeting. At 10:45 UTC, thermal imaging satellites, now operating in their adjusted positions, recorded a subtle but measurable rise in sea surface temperature above sections of the southern Pacific. The increase was modest at first, tenths of a degree. Within the next hour, localized pockets showed a 1.4 degree Celsius increase, not enough to trigger global climate alarms, but significant for a deep ocean environment typically stable in temperature. Heat at depth does not rise quickly to the surface without cause. Analysts cross-checked for submarine volcanic activity. No seismic precursors were recorded. No magma plume signatures were detected. Yet, the acoustic signal from the trench intensified. At this stage, two possibilities emerged. The first is that 3I, Atlas, initiated an experiment using our satellites as instrumentation to probe Earth's deep biosphere. The second is that it triggered something already present, something capable of responding. We often frame extraterrestrial contact as a top-down encounter, visitors arriving from above to communicate with surface civilizations. But what if the planet itself hosts layers of complexity we have not cataloged? The deep ocean remains one of the least explored environments on Earth. More of the Moon's surface has been mapped in detail than the Mariana Trench. If an advanced intelligence sought to locate or awaken a specific biosignature, it might bypass the atmosphere entirely. The surface biosphere is loud with electromagnetic noise, human radio chatter, and artificial interference. The deep ocean, by contrast, is quiet, insulated, and ancient. By 11 UTC, naval monitoring systems detected subtle water displacement patterns inconsistent with tidal cycles, nothing resembling a tsunami, nothing catastrophic, but measurable movement at depth. The mechanical thrumming shifted frequency slightly, as though responding to a change in input. This raises a question more profound than whether 3I Atlas is intelligent. The data increasingly suggests it is. The deeper question is whether it came searching for us or for something beneath us. Because if the gravitational pulse was a key turning in a lock, then the hydrophone response may have been the tumblers moving into place. And as thermal anomalies continue to rise, the possibility grows that whatever is down there is not inert. It is active. And that leads us directly to what happened at noon UTC when the surface of the Pacific Ocean began to change in ways that cannot be explained by standard oceanography. At 12 UTC, satellite imaging confirmed that the temperature anomalies above the southern Pacific trenches were no longer subtle. The localized 1.4-degree increase, observed an hour earlier, expanded outward in circular patterns. Not chaotic dispersion, but concentric rings, as if energy were radiating from a focal point beneath the surface. Oceanographic buoys in the region recorded pressure fluctuations inconsistent with storm systems or undersea earthquakes. No seismic tremors preceded the event. No tectonic shift signatures were logged. Yet, the water column above the Mariana Trench showed vertical mixing patterns typically associated with hydrothermal eruptions without corresponding magma detection. The mechanical thrumming captured by hydrophones intensified and became modulated, alternating between 78.3 Hz and harmonic multiples. This is where the narrative transitions from hypothesis to measurable anomaly. The satellites that had been repositioned at 8:42 UTC remained in their altered orientation. Their cross-section to the incoming solar plasma remained minimized, and the slowed solar flare continued approaching Earth at reduced velocity. The protective interpretation of the satellite movement gained credibility. If the flare had struck at full strength, it could have disrupted electrical grids, disabled navigation systems, and crippled global communications. Instead, the aligned constellation functioned like a shield. If 3I Atlas intended harm, it executed it poorly. But if it intended containment or preparation, the actions align with defensive strategy. Now, examine the pattern from a systems perspective. An external object manipulates orbital infrastructure. It induces a synchronized electromagnetic oscillation. It triggers a solar amplification event. It directs a gravitational pulse into deep ocean trenches. The trenches respond with structured acoustic output. Thermal activity rises. All of this unfolds in less than 4 hours. At 12:20 UTC, ocean surface imagery captured something unprecedented. Microbubble plumes forming in geometric arrays. These were not methane seeps from decaying organic material. Methane plumes disperse irregularly. These formations appeared patterned linear alignments stretching kilometers across, arranged with angular precision. Marine biologists, reviewing live feeds from remotely operated vehicles, noted increased activity among deep-sea organisms. Species typically isolated near vent systems were migrating upward. Yet there was no evidence of toxic discharge forcing evacuation. It was as if environmental conditions had shifted in a way that signaled change rather than danger. Meanwhile, the ISS crew reported normalization of heart rates. EEG activity returned to baseline. Whatever biological synchronization occurred at 10 UTC had concluded. That synchronization lasted 90 seconds, the same duration the satellites were immobilized. One interpretation becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The orbital alignment acted as a focusing array, amplifying a signal directed not at humanity, but at the deep biosphere. The synchronized human response may have been collateral resonance, a side effect of electromagnetic conditions passing through living neural systems. If so, we must reconsider our position in this event. We may not be the intended recipients. We may be incidental observers. At 12:45 UTC, autonomous underwater sensors detected faint luminescent patterns rising from extreme depths. not bioluminescence typical of marine organisms. The spectral signature differed, leaning toward wavelengths associated with ionized plasma. Yet plasma cannot persist in high-pressure seawater without containment. The readings challenge current models of fluid dynamics and electromagnetic behavior under deep ocean conditions. Simultaneously, analysts recalculated the trajectory of 3I, Atlas. It continues along its path between Mars and Jupiter. It has not altered course toward Earth. It has not accelerated in a threatening vector. Its motion remains steady, almost indifferent. This creates a paradox. The object exhibits advanced manipulation capability, but shows no sign of invasion trajectory. It influences events without approaching. By 13 UTC, one conclusion is unavoidable. This is not random astrophysical coincidence. The coordination across gravity, magnetism, solar activity, and oceanic response suggests orchestration. The question is no longer whether intelligence is involved. The data strongly supports that. The question is what stage of interaction we are witnessing. Because as the Pacific surface continues warming and the geometric bubble arrays expand, the next development will determine whether this sequence represents communication, activation, or emergence. By 1330 UTC, the concentric thermal rings above the southern Pacific trenches stabilized. The temperature increase stopped climbing. Instead of escalating toward catastrophic boiling, the anomaly plateaued. The solar flare, still decelerated by the unexplained gravitational distortion surrounding Earth's orbit, continued dispersing before reaching critical intensity. Electrical grids remained intact. Communication networks functioned normally. The orbital satellites held their new alignment, steady and undamaged. If this were an attack, it has been remarkably restrained. At 14 UTC, deep-sea monitoring cables detected a final shift in the acoustic pattern rising from the Mariana Trench. The mechanical thrumming gradually reduced amplitude and frequency until it matched Earth's baseline Schumann resonance 7.83 Hz, not 78.3. The harmonic multiple had completed its cycle. The pattern returned to the planet's natural electromagnetic rhythm. Moments later, the microbubble arrays dissipated, thermal rings faded, water column mixing slowed. Within 2 hours, ocean surface temperatures returned to seasonal averages. The deep biosphere fell silent. What remains is the record. Fact 1. Over 9,000 satellites were displaced precisely 3 meters against gravitational pull. Fact 2. Their rotation halted simultaneously for 90 seconds. Fact 3. A 78.3 Hz magnetic oscillation synchronized with those events. Fact 4. A solar flare erupted in millisecond alignment and was subsequently mitigated. Fact 5. 7 astronauts experienced identical cardiac synchronization. Fact 6. A gravitational ripple targeted deep ocean trenches, prompting structured acoustic response. Fact 7. All anomalies resolved without destruction. When examined individually, each event strains conventional explanation. Taken together, they form a sequence too coherent to dismiss. We are left with 2 broad interpretations. The first is hostile capability restrained by choice. The second is intervention designed to initiate or maintain equilibrium. The latter aligns more closely with the data. The satellites were not destroyed. The solar flare was moderated. Infrastructure remained functional. Biological systems were not harmed. If 3I, Atlas intended to demonstrate power, it succeeded. It manipulated gravity, magnetism, and solar dynamics with precision beyond human engineering, but it did so without collateral damage. That suggests intent beyond aggression. Consider an analogy from human exploration. When researchers deploy instruments into remote environments, they often calibrate, probe, and stimulate local systems to observe response. They adjust equipment, they trigger controlled reactions, they measure feedback. The sequence observed today resembles controlled experimentation rather than invasion. The unsettling implication is that Earth may host systems possibly biological, possibly technological, that predate human civilization and respond to external stimuli. The deep ocean remains largely unmapped. Its ecosystems evolved in isolation for hundreds of millions of years. If an interstellar intelligence sought to locate long-dormant signatures or monitor planetary stability, the abyss would be a logical focus. In that context, humanity's orbital network functioned as an unintended tool. Our satellites became lenses. Our technology amplified a signal not originally meant for us. As of this recording, 3I Atlas continues its trajectory through the solar system. It has not altered course. It has not repeated the event. The satellites remain in their adjusted orbits, subtly recalibrated. Engineers report no lasting damage. Yet the precedent has been set. We now have measurable evidence that gravity can be manipulated locally without detectable spacetime waves, that solar magnetic fields can be influenced remotely, and that deep ocean systems can respond to focused gravitational signals. Whether this was contact, calibration, or containment remains uncertain. But one conclusion is unavoidable. Our understanding of physics and our understanding of our own planet is incomplete. If you want updates as this investigation unfolds, if you want analysis grounded in data rather than speculation, and if you believe events like this demand careful attention, subscribe to the channel, stay informed, and join the discussion, because what happened on February 24th, 2026 may not be the end of the story, but the beginning of a much larger one.